So, good morning, everyone. We are blessed with rain and cool weather. The air is much more clear and fresh. So, we'll start with prayers, and then I'll lead a short meditation related to the topic we're on now, equanimity. So, take a few moments to refresh, renew the altruistic motivation you generated earlier today. Make that your reason for being here. So now, bring to mind someone that you're fond of, someone you have good feelings for, warm, caring feelings. See if you can have an image of that person as if they're right there in front of you. And let those feelings arise. Seeing this person as very dear, really caring about them, wanting them to be happy, to be well, to have whatever they need to be happy, and to not experience any problems or suffering. And check what it's like for you to have such feelings in your mind. How does it feel when your mind is in that state of really, really caring about another person? And then move that image a little bit to the side and bring to mind another person towards whom you have the opposite feelings. Someone you can't stand, someone you feel really negative, angry, averse. And see if you can have a mental image of that person as if they're there in front of you. And let the feelings you normally have for this person come up in your mind, and just take a step back from those feelings. Try not to get all caught up in them. But just check the quality of your mind, what it feels like when you do have such feelings, such emotions, such thoughts towards this other person. How is that for you? So you probably recognize that it's very unpleasant to have those kinds of feelings, anger, aversion. As Jack Kornfield wrote in one of his books, it's so painful to keep someone out of our heart. So do you think that's true? So imagine if you could have less of those kinds of feelings, anger, aversion, dislike. If you could reduce those kinds of feelings in your mind and be able to have more of the other kinds of feelings, the ones you feel for the people you care about. Is that something you would like to do? And do you think it's possible? Is it doable? And if there are things you can do, methods you can use to decrease the negative and increase the positive feelings, would you like to put your energy into using those methods? So the reason I asked you to check if you think it's possible to change your state of mind and have fewer negative and more positive feelings is because I think sometimes people don't think that that's possible. This might be something that they just came up with on their own, or they may have heard it from others and they took it on, bought into it. And that's a real hindrance. If we think, well, this is how I am, I was born this way. Isn't that the song? Lady Gaga. I was born this way. It's my genes. My brain is hardwired. and I just can't change. This is how I am. So that's something to check, if you think that way, and if so, is it true? Is that really true? I don't think it is true according to science. I think in the past, many decades ago, they used to believe that it wasn't possible to change the brain, and then they discovered neuroplasticity, that it is possible to change our brain. And although in Buddhism, we're not saying our mind is the brain, but if you do think in terms of the brain, then accepting that even our brain can be changed, and definitely, according to Buddhism, the mind can be changed. And it's a question of training or familiarity. And that's actually the meaning of meditation. The word for meditation in Tibetan language and also in Sanskrit has the sense of cultivating, getting used to, getting familiar with, developing. And so what we're trying to do when we meditate is generate positive states of mind like love, kindness, compassion, patience, generosity, and make our minds familiar with those experiences, get used to feeling that way, thinking that way, having that kind of state of mind. Even if you can just do it for a couple of minutes at a time, your mind is getting familiar. And then that starts to become more natural, your natural way of being. So I think it's similar with neuroplasticity. They say if we want to change our brain, we need to train. We need to get used to certain tasks, certain skills, certain ways of doing things, certain ways of thinking. And definitely the brain changes. And so the more we can do this, the more we can bring up these positive states of mind and try to stay in those positive states of mind, even just a few seconds or a few minutes, then gradually we are changing our mind. And we also need to defamiliarize ourselves with the opposite states of mind, like the anger, the self-centeredness, the aversion, and so on. So there's also methods we can use to catch those types of thoughts and feelings when they are starting to arise. The earlier we can notice them, the better. And then once we do notice them in our mind, letting our mind just go with them, but doing something to change them. I'll talk more about that later, but that way we're defamiliarizing ourselves with the unpleasant, painful, disturbing states of mind. So gradually over time, those become weaker, lesser, less frequent, don't last as long even when they do arise. And the positive ones get stronger and last longer when we're able to generate them. And so it's a bit like that old-fashioned kind of scale. I think they still use it sometimes where you have two pans in a balance, when you put more things on one side, the other one goes up. And so it's like that. We're trying to have more of the positive thoughts and feelings and experiences, and they start to build up, and then the negative ones get lesser and lesser and lesser. So it's a gradual process. And maybe it's also helpful to try to think of experiences you've had where you have been able to change your mind, change your attitude. So I had this experience when I was pretty young. So in my family, there are 5 kids, 3 boys and 2 girls. So after many years of being sandwiched between 2 brothers, a girl came along, and I was so delighted to have a sister. Wow. So in the beginning, I was so happy to have a sister, and I really loved her, and we shared a room. We even shared a bed. We played together. We had great times. But then I got to be a teenager, and some of my friends had their own rooms, and I didn't have my own room. I had to share my room with my little sister, and I started to feel kind of resentment, and I was sometimes really nasty to her. I feel very ashamed of some of the things I did and said. But then when I got to be about 16, I don't know what happened, but I just decided I was not going to be like that anymore. I was going to love my sister and be nice to her. And I was able to do it. I mean, maybe because I'd been that way before. It wasn't something totally new, totally unfamiliar. But I just made that decision because it was so unpleasant, being nasty to somebody and for no reason. It's not that she was, a bad kid. She was actually very nice, very sweet. And so, yeah, it was I was even amazed myself that it was so easy to start being nice to her and loving her. And of course, it was so much nicer for both of us to do that. So if you have some experience like that, then you can bring that to mind and use that to prove it to yourself in case you have any doubt that it is possible to change our mind. We do have to make some effort. It may not happen just naturally, automatically, but if we decide that this is what we want to do and put our energy into it, then we can do it. It's important to have that confidence, that certainty that it is possible. Because, like I say, if you don't think that it's possible, if you have this view, this idea, this is how I am and I can't change, you won't even make the effort to change. You won't even try because you think, what's the point? It won't work. Or maybe you try a little bit and it doesn't work, and then you think, no, I can't do it. I can't. It does take some time to bring about a change. It's not going to be immediate overnight. But if we do try and work at it and be patient, keep doing it, we will definitely see changes in ourselves. And again, don't expect massive, dramatic changes, like you're going to be a totally different person in a short period of time. Changes may be small, incremental, and sometimes we may not be able to notice the changes ourselves, but other people might. I once knew this woman who she was coming quite regularly to teachings that I was giving, and was very enthusiastic. And one time we were talking, and she said something like, "Oh, I don't think I've changed at all. I'm still." She did have a bit of a bad temper. It was kind of feisty. I really liked her. She was very feisty, very, assertive. And so from her point of view, she didn't think she had changed, but she was living with one of her sisters, and her sister commented on how she had changed. She still had trouble believing it herself. But yeah, if we do listen to other people, the people, especially the ones we spend time with, and if they make comments about us changing, hopefully changes for the better, not for the worse, then we should listen to that. Yeah, they're probably not lying. They're probably not just saying that for no reason. So again, the problem may be overly unrealistic expectations, and maybe the tendency to put ourselves down and not have confidence in ourselves. So it's important to, listen to and take to heart what other people say. And if they do say things like that, you've changed. You're much nicer than you used to be. You're much more patient than you used to be. Then, accept, okay, maybe that's true. So it is working. These practices do work. So yesterday we started talking about equanimity, and this particular state of mind can be difficult to understand properly, and it's easily misunderstood. I read an interview or anyway, the person doing the talking, the person being interviewed was Thupten Jinpa. who was part of the team that founded this compassion training program at Stanford. And he said that people often misunderstand the Buddhist teachings on non-attachment and equanimity. He said, I have consciously avoided overemphasizing the equanimity step in this compassion training, which is the first step in the Tibetan tradition, in which you view 3 different people, and then you even out your emotional reaction to all of them, and then build on that. Sometimes people take the wrong message out of this and think that compassion and equanimity from a Buddhist perspective means that we shouldn't be favoring our own children, that we shouldn't love them more than a stranger's kids. I don't think that's the correct interpretation. Instead, the message is that you should train your mind and heart to a point where you would be able to love the stranger's children as much as you love your own. But sometimes the message is taken in the opposite direction as a sort of license to disregard your responsibility as parents. I never encountered that, but I guess it's possible. He must have, because again, the compassion training program that they started is taught not just to Buddhists who have a Buddhist worldview and a Buddhist practice and so on, but people who are of other religions or no religion. And so it's perhaps possible without the whole Buddhist framework and how equanimity fits into that people might misunderstand it in that way. So anyway, that's not the meaning. So if any of you are parents, you have kids, equanimity doesn't mean, oh, well, I don't have to care about them. And I also listened to a talk by Alan Wallace, a well-known and experienced Buddhist teacher. And he said that people sometimes think of equanimity as the same as indifference, cold and unfeeling, which is not at all the case. Our mind should have strong love and compassion, and then we work on extending those feelings to everyone, seeing every living being as deserving of those feelings. So that's another misunderstanding people sometimes have about equanimity, that the goal is to just be kind of passive and unfeeling and, not have any emotions towards anybody. But just this, this uncaring indifference. So that is definitely not the case, because our goal, again, equanimity is just like the first step, but, that should be built on by then developing, cultivating, increasing love and compassion and the wish to benefit everybody equally across the board. And just at the end of yesterday afternoon's session, I made a point that is important, but we didn't have time to go further with it, so I want to return to that. So I read a quote from the book In Praise of Great Compassion, where the Dalai Lama said, in cultivating equanimity, we do not seek to abandon the notions of friend and enemy, but to abandon the biased emotions of attachment and antipathy that we feel towards them. And this is something that Lama Tsongkhapa also talks about in his text, the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise on the stages of the path. And in a contemporary commentary to that text by Yangtze Rinpoche's teacher at Maitripa College in Portland. And so he gave an extensive teaching on the Lamrim Chenmo, and it was made into a book called Practicing the Path. So in that book, he says that this practice of equanimity should not invalidate friends and enemies entirely, making them non-existent. So it's not, my understanding is that we're not denying that there are such people who are like friends and helping us, and there are enemies who harm us or want to harm us. We're not denying that. We're not making them all the same. But rather, we're working on our attitudes, our state of mind towards those people. And more clarification of that in a book, I forget the title of the book, but it's the teacher is Geshe-la Tarchin, who lived in somewhere over on the East Coast, I think New Jersey. There's a book by him, teachings by him about developing bodhicitta. He says, temporary friend, temporary enemy, and temporary neutral person do, in fact, exist. But there's no such thing as a permanent or unchangeable enemy, friend, or neutral person. So the way I understand that is, again, we're not denying that some people are kind and helpful to us and also to others. So there are people who behave in those ways, being kind and helpful. And we're not denying that there are other people who are harmful, who do harmful things to oneself and to others. So we're not denying that, ignoring that, pretending that doesn't happen. And we're also not denying that it's easier to get along with some people more than others. So that's just the reality. However, these situations are temporary, transitory. They're not permanent, fixed, carved in stone, existing like that forever, for all of time. But things are contingent on many different factors and causes and conditions. So, when things change, causes and conditions change, then people can change and relationships can change. And so a person who is kind at one point in time could be unkind at another point in time, and vice versa. Someone who's unkind at one point could be kind at another point. So people change and our relationships change. So this is what we need to understand and not hold on to, cling to the way things are at one point in time as if that's the way they will be forever. And again, Yangtze Rinpoche in his commentary says, by cultivating equanimity, we are merely trying to target the obsessive mind of attachment that we have in relation to friends and the aggressive mind of anger that we have in relation to enemies, and neutralize these. Okay, so that's mainly the point. The point is to work on those attitudes that we have, which I'll talk more about those later, that they are harmful and disturbing, and they're actually poisonous. The term in Buddhist texts is poisons or toxins, maybe a contemporary version of that. The three toxic states of mind: greed, hatred, and ignorance. So my understanding then is that developing equanimity doesn't mean that we're going to have the exact same relationship with everyone. That's simply not possible, even if you were a Buddha. and you did feel love and compassion for everybody, and you wanted to be friends with everybody. Not everybody will want to be your friend. I've heard the Dalai Lama say that, when he meets people, he always smiles and is very friendly, and many people will smile back, but not everybody. Sometimes people, respond in an unfriendly way. But he says, well, never mind. At least I feel good about my friendliness. Yeah. So that's how it is. So even if we have warm and caring and friendly, kind, compassionate attitudes towards others and want to connect with them in a positive way, not everyone is going to respond in the same way. So there'll be some people who will feel hostile to us, mistrustful, whatever. So we can't change that. We can't change other people, but we can change our own mind, our own attitude. So then contemplating impermanence, which is a really important topic in Buddhism. Buddha talked a lot about impermanence and the importance of meditating on impermanence. That is a very helpful thing for cultivating equanimity. And impermanence can mean different things. There's a coarse, gross level of impermanence that we can see. It's like visible to us, like when somebody dies, or a tree falls down, or is cut down, or a house burns down. So something that once existed is no longer there, or it undergoes a drastic change that's visible to us. So that's coarse impermanence, gross impermanence, because we can see it, it's visible. And then there's the subtle level of impermanence, which is the fact that things are changing all the time, every tiny fraction of a moment, nanosecond or whatever. I don't know what's the smallest unit of time, but in that smallest unit of time, things change. They're not the same from one moment to the next. So we know that in science, material things are made up of particles, and those can be broken down into smaller and smaller parts. And when you get down to that level of these extremely tiny particles, there's constant movement and change. So if the things that make up our bodies and all the physical things in the world around us, if those are changing every moment, then of course these larger things are changing every moment, which is why eventually things wear out, get old, and die or fall apart or get destroyed. So this is a reality, and it isn't a religious belief that we have to decide whether we believe or not. It's just the truth. It's the nature of things. We can experience it ourselves. But it's opposite to how we normally see things and how we normally think. We don't normally see things as impermanent, but we see them in just the opposite way, as permanent. We see people as impermanent. Not intellectually. I mean, of course, intellectually we would say, no, I know I'm not permanent. I know I'm getting older. I know I'm going to die one day. So we know those things intellectually. But when it comes to our feelings, our kind of gut level way of reacting to things, feeling about things, seeing things, on that level, we do tend to see things as if they're not going to be there forever, as if they are not going to change, as if they stay the same. That's why we get so shocked, upset, when we do encounter some change that we don't want, like the death of a loved one, or even learning that someone we love, someone we care about, has been diagnosed with a terminal illness, or that we have been diagnosed with a terminal illness. It's like, our reaction is like, how could that possibly happen to me, to this person, to my loved one? So if we really understood impermanence, if we really accepted impermanence, then we wouldn't be so shocked about such news, such events. We would just know, well, that was bound to happen sooner or later, so it's just the normal course of things. So that's why it's so important to contemplate impermanence again and again and again, really make our minds familiar with it, so that we do come to understand and accept that is how things are. It will save us from a lot of suffering, a lot of that kind of shock and upsetness and grief. And it's helpful here with what we're trying to cultivate in this process of equanimity. So applying that understanding of impermanence to relationships and recognizing that relationships are not permanent, but are impermanent. They can change, they do change. And it's because of causes and conditions that we have no control over, you know. And so by becoming more familiar with, more accepting of impermanence, then we can gradually come to see there's no good reason to hate anybody, to push anybody out of our hearts, out of our warmth and our care. This takes time. Yeah, it may not happen immediately, but slowly the more we contemplate these points, the more we'll become convinced of that. I think it can also help to get a better understanding of impermanence to think of some analogies. And some of these might apply to you. You may have had this kind of experience. So parents, if they have a number of children, the ideal scenario is that they care equally for all their children. It's hard to do, I'm sure. Yeah, there's one child who's really well behaved and very helpful and always does what you ask them to do, and another child who's very rowdy and wild and never does what you ask them to do. Difficult, challenging, yeah, to have equanimity. But I think if you really take your role as parent seriously, then you really do try to treat them equally and love them equally and do the best you can to help all these children. And the same with teachers. So if you're a teacher and you really take that role seriously, you have a large group of kids, students, and ideally you want to help each and every one of them, not just the bright ones, the quick ones, the ones that really want to learn, and forget about those wild kids who are just making mischief. And another analogy would be people in the medical profession, doctors, nurses, medical workers. Yeah, so they're dealing with different patients. And I mean, it's actually an oath. Doctors take an oath to care for everybody. Yeah, if they were to reject anybody and say, no, I'm not going to help that person, I'm not going to take care of that person, they can lose their license. So regardless of who this person is, what they look like, how they behave, what race they are, or gender, or religious preference, or whatever, it's a person who's sick or injured, and you take care of them. I know I met this man who was a doctor, and he said he was once asked to go into a prison and take care of an inmate who was ill. And he said it was very challenging because he was told what this person had done, what crimes he had committed, and apparently they were really awful. So it was like very challenging for him to have the same degree of care, compassion towards this inmate that he would have to his other patients. So it's not easy. Equanimity is definitely not easy, but if we can see the value of it, the benefit of it, then we can work towards it, and even to have the aspiration, to think, yes, I recognize that equanimity is a good state of mind, and I want to have it, and I will try to have it. Even to have that wish, that aspiration is already very positive. Or another analogy would be, let's say there's a large number of people who are hungry, don't have enough to eat, and you're an aid worker distributing food to these people. So would it be right for you to look at those people and say, well, I like this person, so I'm going to give them more food, and I don't like the looks of that person, so I'm going to give them less food? I mean, that would be wrong. And we would know instinctively, intuitively, that that would not be right. So those are, normal human experiences of where equanimity is needed and is practiced. I mean, people do have this experience of treating others in an equal way, regardless of how those people may behave and look and so on. So it's important for us to do a kind of comparison between having equanimity, having that state of mind, and not having it, which is having prejudice, bias, yeah, and compare those two, and decide for ourselves which one is preferable, which one we like to have more of. It could also be helpful if we've ever had an experience of being on the receiving end of another person's prejudice or bias. If we have noticed that somebody isn't treating us as nicely as they're treating somebody else. So if you've ever had that experience, that's pretty ugly and painful. So that way we can see the result of a lack of equanimity, how it is for the recipients, the people on the receiving end of that. So that could help too, to be more convinced that we don't want to treat people that way. We don't want to have that kind of bias and prejudice and injustice. Also in the world, looking at examples in the world of like the disparity between the rich and the poor, which they say is growing more and more. I don't understand all the causes and reasons for that, but probably a lack of equanimity is a big part of it. People who are wealthy want to stay within that circle of people and friends, and so they take care of each other, they help each other. And then those who are not wealthy, who are on the bottom, well, we're not going to take care of them, we're not going to help them. So I think a lack of equanimity is one cause for that situation. And then, of course, racial prejudice, all different kinds of prejudice that people can hold. My group is the best group, and we take care of each other, and we exclude others who are not like us. So this us and them kind of mentality is so ugly and leads to so many problems, so much suffering. Yeah, so there's lots of examples of that in society and in the world. So looking at those, thinking about those, recognizing that a lack of equanimity and its opposite, the prejudice, bias, kinds of attitudes, which so easily arise in us. I mean, we all have them. Everybody has them. We shouldn't point our fingers at others and say, oh, you're like that, but I'm not like that. So we need to look into ourselves and see that we have those attitudes too, and then really clearly see how harmful they are, how they just lead to more problems, more suffering, just in a conventional sense in the world right now. But then also for spiritual practice, if our goal is to become like Chenrezig, become like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, then this is definitely something we have to work on. So if we do get to that point of being convinced that equanimity is a good thing to have and we want to cultivate it, then we contemplate reasons for having equanimity. such as impermanence, how relationships are impermanent. And we can look at our own experiences in life to see examples of that. Friends who became enemies, enemies who became friends, strangers who went either way. So to just really drive home that point that, yeah, relationships can change. I mean, not always. It's possible there are cases of friendships that last until death. And also enemyships that last until death. But that's why it's helpful to then, if you can, think of other lifetimes. And this is challenging. I mean, we can't, at our present level of mental development, be 100% sure one way or the other. We can't be 100% sure that there are past lives, nor can we be 100% sure that there are not past lives. So we just don't have the experience to prove it one way or the other. But there are stories that might help us be more convinced. There's one story they tell in the Tibetan teachings. It must come from the sutras somewhere, because the story concerns Shariputra, who was one of the main disciples of the Buddha, renowned for his wisdom. And one day Shariputra was going on alms round. The monks would take their bowls and walk through town, and people would give them food to eat. And so while he was on his alms round, he passed a house and saw a scene consisting of a family. There was a man and his wife and a baby, and they were having a meal. And there was the dog, the family dog, sitting down below the table, you know, like they do. And because he had clairvoyance, because, you know, his mind was quite highly accomplished, so he was able to see more than what appeared to the eye. And he was able to see that it's a complicated situation, but past life connections of these people. So what they were eating, what they were having for dinner was fish. And the man had caught the fish. There was a pond behind the house. So the man had gone fishing and caught this fish in the pond, and the wife cooked it, and they were eating it for dinner. And so Shariputra was able to see that the fish that they were having for dinner was actually the man's father, who had died sometime earlier and was reborn as a fish in that pond. And so they caught the fish, and now they're eating it. And the dog that was, you know, begging for some of the food had been the man's mother. She had also passed away, and because of her strong attachment to her son and her, you know, daughter-in-law, she was born as the family dog. And then the baby that I think it was the mother or father was holding the baby. I think it was the father. Yeah, the father was holding the baby on his lap while they were eating. And Shariputra saw that the baby had been the wife's lover. So she was having this affair. And the man, the husband, was, you know, got really angry and killed that person. And so because of that person's attachment to the wife, was born as her baby. And now the man was holding this baby, who was his enemy before, on his lap. So Shariputra was able to see all this with his clairvoyance, and he just laughed and said, you know, how crazy samsara is. So that story may be hard to believe, but I've heard and read more contemporary stories that are similar to that. They may also be hard to believe, but we can't be 100% sure that they're not true. So one story I heard from a friend of another nun, and she said she had read this in the newspaper. And it must have happened sometime after the Second World War. A family, an English family, mother, father, and their little boy were on holiday in France. They were driving through the French countryside. And at one point, the little boy who was in the back of the car suddenly cried out, "Daddy, Daddy, that's the place where you shot me." And of course, the parents are like, "What?" But it turns out that the father had been a soldier in the English army during the Second World War and was fighting in France. And remembered that he had been in that place. He had been in that village and had shot a German soldier. So, and let's see, there are a couple of other stories. Oh yeah, there's another one. I read this one in a book by a Zen teacher. I think it may have been Philip Kapleau, who was Zen. I think he might have passed away now, but was a teacher in New York City. And he said one of his students, a woman who was a meditator, had problems with a colleague at work. So she and this colleague, a man, just were always like that. Just couldn't get along, always in conflict, which was quite, troubling and disturbing. So at one point when she was doing her meditation, a memory surfaced in her mind, which sometimes happens. Other people have this experience as well. When your mind kind of gets more calm and clear, sometimes these things will come up from the depths of the mind. And it was a memory of a past life, which was sometime in the Middle Ages, medieval times. And she was a woman who had a baby, and the baby was blind and deaf. And probably because she realized it would have a very difficult life, and maybe also she would have a difficult time raising this child, one day she took a pillow and placed it over the baby's face and held it down until the baby stopped breathing. And so while she was remembering this, she said she could feel the anger. The baby was angry at her. And guess what happened to that baby? So she understood this was her colleague. And she remembered another life, which was during one of the Inquisitions. They have these Inquisitions in Europe where a lot of people were killed because of being accused of heresy. And in that life, she was the victim. She was being burned at the stake by somebody. And the person who did that to her was, again, her colleague, this colleague. So these came up in her mind, and she wondered whether she should talk to her colleague about it. Yeah. In the end, she decided to try it. So she invited him to have coffee and then told him about these memories that she had. And surprisingly, he accepted. He didn't say, "You're nuts," which some people would do, but he accepted it. And then they had a talk about their differences and worked them out. And from that time on, they got along. They no longer had these conflicts. So it shows that having memories of past life can sometimes explain present situations, present circumstances in such a way that we can resolve them more easily. And so, like a lot of therapists, I don't know about a lot, but some therapists are using hypnosis to help their patients understand causes of their problems, both physical ailments, as well as mental, emotional problems, relationship problems. And by remembering a previous life in which something happened, and as a result of that, they're having this present problem, then they're able to recover from this present problem. And so one of these therapists is an American psychiatrist, Brian Weiss, who kind of accidentally came across reincarnation through one of his patients, because he would sometimes use hypnotherapy. So this one patient was a woman he'd been working with for a long time, and just, she wasn't recovering from her problems. And finally, he used hypnosis. And under hypnosis, she was able to remember all these past lives, which was the first time he'd ever encountered that. And he was like, what is this? And at first, he didn't believe it. He didn't believe in past lives because it wasn't part of his worldview. But then something happened with this one patient, this woman. She started talking about things about him that there's no way she could have known that. For example, that he and his wife had had a child who died very young when it was still an infant from some rare illness. He had never told her about that, and there's no way she could have found out about it. So he thought, whoa, what's going on here? And there was also something else about his father that she talked about that, again, like, how could she know this? So this opened up his mind to, be more open to the idea of reincarnation. And then he started having more and more experiences of people remembering past lives and being helped, that, this would actually help in their healing of problems that other methods were not working for. So I read one of his books. He told lots of stories of his patients, and there was one really interesting one. A woman who was a mother of several children, she had a lot of problems with one of her children, a daughter. And right from birth, she said when she first held this baby in her arms, she felt aversion, which she hadn't felt before with her other children. And she thought, you can imagine being a mother and having aversion to your baby. That's not supposed to happen. So, it was probably quite troubling for her. But it continued as the child grew older. The child and the mother just had endless problems. And then finally, when it was a daughter, when she was in her late teens or early 20s, that's probably when it really reached a point. The mother finally decided to seek help. So she went to see Brian Weiss, and under hypnosis, she remembered a previous life in which she and her daughter were women who were both in love with the same man and vying for his attention, rivals, for this man's attention. And the man was her husband. And then the really interesting thing is that her daughter independently went to see another therapist, because she was also quite troubled by this relationship with her mother and was seeking help for that. And she was also hypnotized. And when she was hypnotized, she remembered the same life. So she also remembered her and her mother, being rivals for this man's attention. So that's really interesting. A skeptic would say, oh, they're just lying. They really secretly talked to each other beforehand and just made up this whole story, or it's just a coincidence. But yeah, for two people independently, without talking to each other beforehand, having the same memory, remembering the same life, kind of hard to explain that. But it helped them, because after having these experiences under hypnosis, then they talked to each other and they were able to understand why they had such trouble with each other. And that really helped them to heal that relationship. So Buddhism says that we have been in relationships with everybody before. There's nobody who is a total stranger, nobody who hasn't been our friend and our enemy. So we can go from one type of relationship to another, from a, combative enemy kind of relationship to a very loving relationship, and vice versa. In one lifetime, having a very loving relationship, in another lifetime, being in conflict. And this is because of karma. Our karma is so complex. We have both good karma and bad karma. We've helped each other, we've harmed each other. And so we keep running into each other again and again. And yeah. So if you can accept that, that can help, again, with equanimity. Because if we think, I don't want to have bad relationships with people. I don't want to run into enemies and have hatred and have them hate me and be hurting each other. And one way to avoid that, of course, is to be careful about our karma and really try as much as we can to avoid creating negative karma and create virtuous karma as much as we can, and really cultivate good feelings towards others, regardless of how they behave. But from our side, we can work on our mind and learn to be free of anger and hatred and the wish to harm others. So if you can accept this broad view of many lifetimes, not just this lifetime, but we've had past lives, we will have more lives after that. That gives another perspective that can be very helpful for cultivating equanimity. And that's actually the way it's done traditionally in the traditional teachings. They ask you to think about, and it's the words of the Buddha. The Buddha himself talked about this. That, we've all been each other's friend and enemy and stranger countless times. So let's call it quits. Let's stop doing this and cultivate positive qualities, positive feelings towards others. Stop hanging on to anger and hatred towards enemies. So there's a lot of different ideas that can help with equanimity. Some of them may make sense to you. Some of them may not. So you can just leave those aside, put those on the shelf and say, no, that one is too hard for me. I can't accept that one. So just put it on the shelf for now. Maybe later your mind will change and you might be more open to contemplating that. But yeah, leave it aside for now and then focus on whatever of the methods that you can accept and you feel this is something I can work on. Such as, one of the other methods is contemplating how everyone is equal in wanting to be happy and not suffer. That's a really helpful one. And you don't have to think about past lives and future lives to understand that. Yeah, just observing people and understanding, and not just people, also animals. You can observe how, animals try to find the most comfortable place to take their nap and places to get nice food that they like to eat and water they like to drink. And they run away from any threat, anything that threatens their life, their happiness, and so on. So we can observe that in animals as well. They're just trying to be happy, to fulfill their needs and wishes, trying to avoid suffering and pain and problems, just like us. So we're all the same. And that's a universal idea. In Christianity, there's what's called the Golden Rule. Is it the Golden Rule? Which goes something like, do to others what you want them to do to you, and don't do what you don't want them to do, or something like that. I don't remember the exact words, but it was something that Jesus said. But you find this, I found this in Wikipedia, that this is a very universal idea. It's in different words, but it's found in many, many different religions, philosophies. So at the time of Jesus, there was a rabbi who said something similar. What was his name? Rabbi Hillel. Almost exactly the same as Jesus. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. Something like that. And yeah, so it's just like, what's the word? Conventional wisdom. Yeah, if you really look into your own heart and have a good understanding of your own mind, your own experience, and then you look at other people, it's obvious that, yeah, everyone is the same. And it makes complete sense to treat them according to that. Yeah, just like I don't want anyone to be mean to me. That's really painful. Well, everyone else feels that way too. So let's not be mean to people. And just like I want people to be nice to me, kind and considerate and helpful, well, that's how other people are too. So, yeah, let's be kind to others. Yeah, so just that itself is a very helpful thing to contemplate and try to live in your life. And there's also other ways that we are equal. I was once at a group, it was people of different religions gathered together and discussing, I don't remember the exact context, but somebody said something that I thought was quite beautiful. He said, all of our tears are salty, all of our blood is red. I thought, yeah, I mean, if we just think about the sameness, the commonality between ourselves and others, we all cry. We all have pain and shed tears, and our tears are salty. And we sometimes get wounded, and our blood flows, and our blood is red. So many things we have in common. And it's useful to focus on those and feel that sameness with others, and then use that to try to respect and be considerate of others. And another thing I like to think of is we all start off life as tiny, helpless babies. Yeah, we all come out of our mother's womb as this, tiny little creature, totally helpless, totally dependent on others. We wouldn't be able to survive if it weren't for the kindness of others. Usually our parents, but also other people. When you see a baby, it just brings up this feeling of, I have to take care of this creature. This is like me, another one like me, but very tiny. And yeah, they need to be taken care of. You don't want them to fall off the table or, be unhappy. So, so we were all like that once upon a time. And then we grow up and we become very different. But going back to that beginning, that origin, and recognizing we're all the same at that time in our life. And then at the end of our life, it's almost the same. It's almost return to infancy. Your body, even physically, your body tends to shrink when you get older, and becoming more helpless, more dependent on others. And so again, when we see an elderly person who's in need, it brings up that wish to care, to take care. And then in Buddhism, we say all beings are the same in that we have Buddha nature, the potential to reach enlightenment. This is another thing that's difficult to understand, but the more you study and also the more you look at your own mind, your own experience, then it becomes more clear. But I think to really be convinced of this requires a realization of emptiness. They say once you've realized emptiness, and it doesn't have to be a direct realization of emptiness, it could be an inferential realization of emptiness, but when you realize emptiness, at that point you know it's possible. You realize there is a way to free the mind from the negative attitudes, the delusions, the afflictions, and so on. So you can clear those out such that they will never arise again, which is the meaning of Buddha nature. It's the potential of our mind, the ability of our mind to become totally free of all faulty things, like greed, hatred, ignorance, and all the things that prevent our mind from being enlightened. Those are not permanent fixtures in our mind. They're not going to be there forever and ever. They can be cleared away. So until we get to the point of realizing emptiness, we just have to take it on faith. I like the idea. I think many people like the idea. It's a beautiful idea that every single living being has that potential within them. And it's something that can never be destroyed, can never be damaged. It's always there. It's the true nature of the mind. And it's just a question of meeting with the right conditions that will enable us to start working on cultivating it and bringing it out and making it a reality. So I think that's why it said the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas don't have any enemies. They don't hold anybody out of their love and compassion, because they can see it directly, that each and every person, each and every being, even the most horrible, the ones who are doing the most horrible things, are not going to be like that forever. That's just temporary. But they will change, and one day they will become enlightened too. So this is true for everybody. Everyone has that same nature, that same potential, that same capacity. So the more we contemplate that, get familiar with that, that can also be brought up to help us be more equanimous. So one time when I was teaching this practice, and we did a meditation together. We did the equanimity meditation with the 3 persons, friend, enemy, stranger. And then afterwards we were talking about it. And one of the participants, a woman, said that she put her husband in all 3 places. And I thought, wow, she's really on the ball. She's really smart. Because this is actually true. I'm sure if we check, we can see the same person, one person, at certain points in time, that person may be our dearest friend. We feel so good about them. We have all these warm and caring feelings about that person. But at another point in time, when they did something we didn't like, or didn't do what we wanted them to do, or whatever, and we're in a bad state of mind, that person could be our worst enemy. We can become so angry at them. We may even want to kill them. It's the same person, right? And maybe they haven't changed much, but our mind has changed. And then there could be other times when, for example, maybe you're busy, you got some project you're working on and a deadline to meet, and you're just totally focused on that. And maybe that person's around and they're trying to get your attention. And at that point in time, they're like a stranger. Yeah. You don't feel anything for them. You just block them out. So you can check if that's true. Yeah. And that reality, that fact, is very helpful to understand as well. Because our tendency is to think that the person we like has these wonderful qualities, this likability from their own side. They are really like that. They are wonderful. They are lovable. And I cannot help but love them. So it's like something coming from over there, coming from that person. And then the person we dislike, this is kind of easier to recognize. When we don't like somebody, when we have aversion, anger, hatred for someone, again, it seems like it's because of them. I can't help but dislike them because they're horrible, they're bad, permanently, inherently, from their own side. That's their nature. And I can't help but feel that way. Everybody feels that way. Everybody dislikes that person because that's how they are. So this is how we tend to see these objects of our attachment and aversion. But it's easy to recognize that that's not realistic. Because if it was true that that person, the one you like, a friend, if that person really was likable and lovable from their own side, everybody should love them. But that's not true. There are people who look at that, but for other people, that person is their enemy. They would put that person in the enemy place. They can't stand that person. They hate that person. Ugh. They don't understand how you could like that person. That's true, right? And even ourselves. We may be able to think of moments when that person is also our enemy. We're just infuriated at them. And then with our enemy, the one we dislike, the one we have these negative feelings for, if it was true that that person was 100% bad, unlikable, hateable from their own side, and we just can't help but feel that way, everyone else should feel that way too. But is that the case? Does everybody hate that person? No. There's lots of examples of that in the world right now. But then we might think, oh, but they don't know the truth. They don't know the reality of this person. They are blind. Yeah, well, ask yourself, do you know the truth of this person? Do you know the reality of that person? Yeah, do you know that person 100% all the way through, everything about them? And you are in a position to say, no, they're bad, they're horrible. There's nothing good about them at all. So this kind of takes us in the direction of emptiness, understanding emptiness, which is basically that the way we see people and things isn't the way they really are. We don't see the truth, the reality of things. We see a distorted picture, a mistaken picture, a prejudiced picture of things. And so this kind of contemplation can really help us to recognize that. Doesn't mean this is going to lead us to a full-blown realization of emptiness, but it's going in that direction. And one benefit of this contemplation is to soften our mind. Our mind will become more soft, more loose, more open, rather than rigid and fixed. I hate that person. I could never like that person. There's nothing good about them at all. Maybe that's not true. Maybe there is something there and we're just not seeing it. I had this great experience once. It was, I don't know, during the presidency of George W. Bush. I was so angry at that guy. I really had a hard time. I know I'm not alone. But, yeah, especially when he started the Iraq War. I was not happy about that at all. And I put all the blame on him. It's his fault. And one day I was attending some teachings by the Dalai Lama. And it was in Europe. And he was kind of peppering his teachings with comments about politics and different world leaders and this and that. And at one point he started talking about George Bush. And he said, I like George Bush. And he qualified that by saying, I don't like his politics, but I like him as a person. He's very down to earth. And I was just amazed. And I thought about that, and I thought, hey, look, I have never met George Bush. I've never been even in the same room with him. I've only seen him on TV and newspapers and so on. Dalai Lama has met him. They've spent time together, talked together, ate together. He's had real personal interaction with George Bush. And if he says he likes George Bush, and I do trust the Dalai Lama, I don't think he's deluded, there must be something good there. So that was so helpful for me to, I mean, I knew I didn't want to continue being angry at George Bush, but that really helped me to start working on that and thinking, well, there must be some good qualities there. So I started making an active effort to look into good qualities, try to find good qualities. I mean, everybody does have some good qualities. And what happens with it when we're angry, when we have anger and hatred, is like we totally ignore any good qualities, any good things about the person, and only focus on those things that we don't like, that we are judgmental of, as if that's all there is. That's all there is to that person, is those qualities, nothing else. This is what anger does. This is a function of anger and hatred, what it does to our mind. And it's helpful to recognize that, and to recognize how distorted it is, how unrealistic it is. And so if we can recognize that, that will be very helpful to say, no, this isn't right. I don't want to be stuck in this state of mind. I want to work on it. And then to start working on it. So I would think about how, well, he must love his mom and dad and his wife and his kids and his dog and cat and I don't know, whatever pets he has, and his friends. And so he's probably a really nice person to them. And, some of the things he has done in his career as presidency were probably quite good. Yeah. So you're more willing to look for likable things, positive things in the person. And the more you can see some good things about the person, then that will kind of decrease your aversion. And you may even get to the point where you lose it altogether. And I think I've stopped being angry at George Bush. I mean, he's not president anymore, which helps. But also one time I was talking to a friend, and she told me that he's a really good artist. And she said, go online, you can find paintings that he's done. So I went online, and there's all these portraits that he painted of various world leaders, including the Dalai Lama. And I thought, wow, he painted a portrait of the Dalai Lama, and it's quite good. Certainly better than I could do. And there was also one picture that really touched me. It was a painting of his little white dog. And he was standing next to it with his kind of apron, this big grin on his face, like a little boy. He's saying, look, Mom, I painted Sparky, or something, I don't know. And that just melted my heart. I mean, how can I be angry at that guy? Somebody who would take delight in painting a portrait of their little dog. So, yeah. And then some years ago when his mother passed away, right? His mother, Yeah, Barbara. Yeah. So when his mother passed away, I really felt genuine concern. I really felt I would like to write to him and say, I feel for you. I'm sorry for your loss. And yeah, so I could see my mind has definitely changed towards that person. Yeah. So anyway, this kind of checking what we consider to be reality. Yeah. When we feel angry at someone or we feel super attached to someone, do we really see that person realistically as they are? So I have more to say about equanimity. I'll finish this afternoon. It is important, I hope. And there's a couple of questions here, but I need glasses to read them, and I didn't bring my glasses. So I'll look at them and answer them in the afternoon. So let's conclude by dedicating the merit, the positive energy we've accumulated through this session, starting with a good motivation, doing some reflection, listening, thinking. So let's share this merit with all living beings, wishing everyone to be free of their suffering and its causes, have happiness in its causes, and ultimately reach enlightenment.